My kids wants me to drop my wife and take care of my sick ex-husband. Now they are mad because they are blocked. I have been married to my wife, Angela, for a year, and we're planning our first anniversary celebration with a trip overseas. I was very excited to spend this time with my wife, but unfortunately my ex-husband Dan recent hospitalization is putting a damper on my plans. Backstory: I met Dan in college and we got married shortly after graduating when we found out that I was pregnant. At the time it felt like the right thing to do, but looking back it was a bad idea. I resented having to put my career aspirations on hold in order to be the full-time caregiver, and Dan resented having to be the main financial provider. However, this did not stop him from constantly bringing it up whenever I asked him to help with the kids or the home. He also never defended me when his mother would stop by, unannounced, and the household wasn't up to the queen standard. I felt so exhausted and trapped, and if it weren't for my kids, Junior, 34, Sarah, 32, Michelle, 29, and Mike, 29, I would have left years ago. Unfortunately, Dan did not have the same values as me and blindsided me with divorce papers. It was a rough process, but after the first year of our divorce being finalized, I got my groove back, and within the next 4 years I was able to get a nice apartment and good career. Present day. A couple of weeks ago, Dan was rushed to the hospital, and while the doctors were able to save him, his health took a turn for the worse. His wife is now essentially working to provide for their kids, while her parents watch them to save on daycare. I learned all of this through my children as I do not care to have any direct contact with Dan, but almost every time I talk to them, they always bring up how stressed and tired they are over having to look after their father. I thought I was just being a sympathetic ear, but a couple of days ago my children came together to confront me about my lack of willingness to offer assistance to their father, and as their mother I should want to care for him to make their own lives easier. My children know that while I have a full-time job I can make up my own hours, and they want me to come into his house at least twice a week to make sure he's clean and fed, or pay for a nurse to come do it. I refused, stating that Dan and I have been divorced for years, and that their stepmom can handle that. That's when they told me that she didn't care about their dad like they do, and is most likely hoping for him to pass, so she can collect on his insurance policy as the legal wife. My daughter Sarah then began to cry and asked me if I cared whether or not she had a dad anymore, while Junior and Mike thought that I was being bitter. Michelle asked me to put them first, and that I can reschedule my anniversary trip with Angela. My former in-laws are also calling me to say that I need to do this, and that I'd be a horrible mom. Eta, update. 3 months later, I went on cruise. It was great and my wife and I had a really great time. My children were predictably unhappy, and I'm sure that my temporary blocking of them didn't make it better. Most of my children kept calling and telling me that I was a selfish and awful woman for choosing to go on the vacation instead of being there for the family, but, like many of you have stated, I reminded them that their father divorced me, and therefore my obligations to him ended. If it were any of them that had a medical need, I would cancel without question, but I would not for their father. I thought I could leave it at that, but because they kept calling and texting the first 3 days of the trip, and that's when I decided to block. Unfortunately, my ex's health took a turn for the worse, and he had to go back to the hospital, and his lack of proper care triggered an investigation. I didn't know any of this until I unblocked my kids the day I got back, and some of them blamed me. I've come to the conclusion that they're all just mad at the situation, and I'm a convenient villain. I've accepted this because I can understand the fear and anger of facing the idea of losing a parent that you love. I just hope that one day we can all sit down with a family therapist and mediate the situation. However, this did start to trigger my past tendencies of sacrificing my own happiness and well-being for my children, but my wife, therapist, and even a small piece of my inner self had to remind me that my children are adults, and that my ex isn't my responsibility. I tried to reach out, and so far most of my children aren't talking to me, and have made it very clear that I will not be able to see my grandchildren as a punishment. It's sad, and I'm still wrestling with the guilt and doubt, but my wife and stepchildren are being very supportive.